Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody. Welcome back to my YouTube channel and to another layout design video. This project is for an HO scale layout that the client wants to build in an attic over his garage. And this is a view of one end of the attic space. It's a long, narrow room, about half of which is a sitting area and the rest is for the railroad. You'll probably also notice that there is a G-scale loop hanging from the ceiling and a lot of display shelves all the way down one side over some built-in cabinets. Here are some approximate dimensions for the end of the room that the client wants to use for the railroad, and it is roughly a 15-foot square space. Now this railroad is somewhat different from anything else I've ever designed. It is certainly not going to be a prototypical design. The client has collected a large number of trains from many countries and also different continents during his travels. They're mostly passenger trains, and he just wants to be able to see them run. The client has asked for a double-track continuous loop and as big a passenger station as I can fit in the space. He does want to do a little bit of switching, but the main focus is going to be on watching the trains run through the landscape. Here is the first design that I drew. There is a double-track folded dog bone with a junction leading to a terminal station and another junction facing the opposite direction, which will go down to some staging. And I haven't yet decided how the staging is going to work, although I expect it to be a reversing loop under the right-hand lobe of the railroad. This plan calls for 30-inch radius curves, and although it looks like it might fit, it's extremely tight. So I suggested to the customer that we stretch it all the way to the west side of the room, building this lobe cantilevered over the top of the built-in cabinets, and that gives us several extra feet to play with. Here's what I drew for him, and as you can see, this whole area of the railroad now fits a lot better. I've also shown the single track branch line down to the staging with a reversing loop in this area, although the staging tracks as drawn are very much on the short side, so that's something that has to be fixed. Now, although initially the client didn't think that he needed direct access to the window, at this point he said that he did actually need access. So here is that same design, twisted somewhat to allow a minimal access space in front of the window. And also on this one I've added another connection, connection Z, and the idea behind this one is to allow another reversing loop facing the staging yard so that he doesn't have to manually turn all his trains in the terminus. He has the option of returning to staging, or alternatively to reverse the train and then continue around the main line and just back into the terminus instead, allowing him to skip the process of turning trains in the terminus if he feels like he'd rather just let them run that day. Now at this point we ran into a bit of a problem. His wife said that no way would she accept having this turn back loop cantilevered over the built-in cabinets. So now we're going to lose a few feet on this side of the room. I did attempt to get the plan to still fit by dropping to a 27-inch curve from 30 inches, but even so we are getting to the point where it's just too much in too little space. And also by this point in the design process, the client had removed a lot of stuff out of the room, allowing him to get a better measurement, and we found that this dimension was a little bit shorter than he first thought. Only a few inches, but still every adjustment seemed to be counting against us at this point. Although the client was a little disappointed that it started to look as though this schematic that he loved wasn't quite going to fit the room, he and his wife discussed it and decided that they could actually give a little bit more space to the railroad, because the sitting area was taking up a lot more of the room than it needed to. The client asked me what I could do if we could extend the railroad several feet past the attic door, which is the door you saw on the right-hand side in the photograph at the start of the video. And he also asked me if the extra space would allow him to get a through station instead of a terminus. So this is what I sketched. This portion of the railroad is about the same, but the other blob has been moved from the top corner to the other end of the room, and it looks like there is now going to be enough space to get a through station in here. so the client was happy about that. Here I've sketched the path of the main line, going back to a 30-inch radius curve, because 27 isn't really enough for full-length passenger cars. Not only will some of them need adjustment to be able to run, but they won't look as good. 30-inch radius is usually considered the minimum, so I was very glad to be able to go back to it. And at this point, we're going 5 feet past the trim for the attic door. Even though his wife said he could have 6, I thought 5 feet was probably going to be enough, so I decided to limit myself to that for the time being, knowing that I could stretch it later if I needed to. So here is what I sketched in, showing the rough usage of the space, thinking of just having the main line continue through the front 2 tracks of the station, with a series of crossovers at both ends, with several more tracks behind that he can use for switching or terminating trains. The front 2 tracks will be reserved for trains making brief stops only. And the other side of the room can be some fairly dramatic scenery with a deep river valley and a mountain with a tunnel through it at the back, which helps to disguise the main line curving back on itself. Another thing I showed in this view was suggesting an elevated city area over the top of the staging yard, which is now conveniently located opposite his display cabinets, which will make it a lot easier to transfer trains between the two. The client has a lot more than he's going to be able to fit on the railroad at any one time. One shortcoming of this plan is the fact that there is no reversing loop. Once the train is on the railroad, it has to continue in the same direction all the time until he manually reverses it at the station. Here is an attempt to rectify that by adding a series of crossovers in this corner, allowing connections in both directions, forming a pair of reversing loops facing each other. Now, I'm not particularly keen on this arrangement. It makes the curves very hard to fit, and we may end up having to reduce the radius on this crossover. It's also very awkward to get super elevation to work on a curve with crossovers on it. Anyway, when I pointed out the pros and cons to the customer, he immediately said, well, let's just eliminate the loops. He decided he was perfectly happy with a train running in the same direction all the time. This next view shows all the track filled in. The client has a Walthers 90-foot turntable and 6-stall roundhouse, which fits in this corner. He was very happy I was able to get that in. I've also put a few American-style industrial spurs in this end, and a European-style goods yard at the other end. And we're thinking of using the Walthers Milwaukee station as the centerpiece for the layout. In this corner, we're going to be using up some cottages that the client inherited, I think he said, from his grandmother's estate. He has 7 of them altogether, although 2 of them have snow-covered roofs, and I pointed out that those 2 would be rather awkward to fit in and make the scenery look reasonable. So we decided that the other 2 are going to remain in this display cabinet, and we're just going to attempt to fit the other 5 into this corner. Now, bearing in mind that they are not exact HO scale, they're close enough, and the client would really like to see them on the railroad. At this stage, I have not yet filled in the cityscape. It's still only a concept idea. And here is that same plan with the cityscape removed so we can see the staging underneath it. And we're aiming for 8-foot long trains because the client has a couple of that length and all the others are shorter. Now, unfortunately, with 8-foot trains, we do have to curve the end of the station platforms. And for those of you used to American style with ground level platforms, this may not seem like an issue, but he wanted raised platforms, and they do need to be cut back quite a lot on curves, especially when the track is on the inside of the curve and with the platform on the outside. So remembering what I said earlier about there being an extra foot available, we decided at this point to use that space. Here is the next version, with this lobe extended by a foot, allowing me to straighten the platforms. They're not quite 8 feet long, so the locomotive will have to hang over the end on his longer trains. Another change I've made in this plan is to drop the rear main line down below the goods yard area, saving a lot of space and allowing us to extend it by several inches. Here is the gradient profile needed to achieve that. Most of the front portion of the visible loop is all at 54 inches, and we can drop down about a 2% grade. We can lose 3 inches by the time we get to the staging yard, keep the staging tracks level, and then we can lose another inch in this corner, giving us 4 inches of clearance to duck under the goods yard. And then we can regain that height around the opposite end loop. It does add somewhat to the complexity of building it, but not a big deal. It's still fairly straightforward compared with most of what I build. Anyway, here is another view with all the scenery suggestions filled in and a lot more of the cityscape. I've also indicated that this area is a good space for his workbench with plenty of room in front of it. And here is a clean view of it, slightly enlarged with all the annotations removed. Please feel free to pause it, get a longer look if you want to. And although that is about all I really have to say about this layout design, it is not the last time you're going to see it, because the client has contracted me to build it for him. I still have 2 more small layouts to build before I get on with this one, so it's going to be a while yet before I get started, but the client's really looking forward to it, and actually so am I, because it is something a little different from everything I've built recently. Anyway, with that said, I'm going to sign off here, and I will see you next week in my next video. Until then, thanks for watching, and bye for now.